John McMullen will get a kick out of some of these WWE jobbers, I'm sure. What's going on, John?
Jobbers.
Salvatore Bellomo?
Unpredictable Johnny Rods, I'm going to go with. As Johnny Rod's been mentioned.
Paul Roma was mentioned. I know that came up a little earlier. How about
Jose? How about Steve King?
No, but Jose Luis Rivera did get a mention today. And the reason I mentioned Phil Sheridan was on a while back, and he said, "Man, at camp today, Paul Hunter and Caleb Jones looked like they had some nice days." I said, "Phil, these guys sound like a bunch of WWE jobbers."
Yeah, they sound like the conquistadors. But Caleb Jones made a heck of a catch today. He really did. He made a one-handed catch. It was the one ooh and ah. Really, this is 7-8 days in the training camp. It was the biggest ooh and ah we've had to this point. It was a spectacular catch. So. Even though he's a jobber, even the jobbers have their day in the sun. I don't think he's going to make the football team, but he made a heck of a play today.
Any chance any of these quote-unquote jobbers, who's Mr. Lehigh right now? You know, the old Hank Baskett of the world, the Mr. Lehigh. Who's the Mr. Lehigh to start things out for the first week?
Well, I think Doug was asked about the young wide receivers because they have a bunch of them. And I think everybody was their interest was piqued because of the play that Jones made. But actually the first name out of his mouth was a kid by the name of Paul Turner, and he's been a slot receiver. So I think in the coach's minds, he's been the most consistent to this point, and you can argue him. But, you know, it's interesting because we're coming off an off day, and usually you see that's the time you'll see some shifting of the depth chart because coaches sit back and look at the film they've had for the entire week and want to start looking at different players, maybe putting different guys together and seeing how they work. But you didn't see that today. It was basically the same list that we've had the entire time. So I think the Eagles are centered, and there's not going to be a lot of surprises on this roster when it's said and done.
Talking with John McMullen from 97.3 ESPN.com. He was live at Lehigh today for the Eagles, and we talked a little bit.
Not Lehigh.
No, not Lehigh. You're right.
You're going to say Westchester.
I was at a training camp at Westchester back in, I don't remember, 96 maybe, 86 maybe. No, 96 maybe. When they moved to Lehigh?
That's a good question. All the years run together for me. But
they were at Westchester, then Lehigh, now NovaCare, and that's where John was today, at the NovaCare Center, where Wendell Smallwood, I want to get your take on this because he suffered a quad strain, and they updated him, but, you know, Matthews isn't on the field, and Smallwood's not on the field. Does this open up a shot for a guy like Barner or somebody else to maybe move up the depth chart or win a spot on this team?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's his spot to lose at this point because they're going to keep 4 running backs anyway. So really Byron Marshall, the rookie, was going to have to beat out Kenyon Barner in the battle of 2 Oregon products. That would make Chip Kelly grin, no doubt. But so I think Kenyon has already been in the mix, obviously. But these extra reps he's getting, and he played a lot today, so much so that he almost had to tap out because he was so tired because somebody's got to take the reps. And I think the Eagles are figuring out they don't want Darren Sproles wasting all this energy in late July, early August. And that's what's been going on because we're in the second week now. We've had our first off day, and Ryan Matthews is still not to be seen. So he hasn't been out there, and now Smallwood hits the sideline. So all of a sudden, you got some depth issues at that running back position, and the last thing you want to do is put more on the plate of Darren Sproles because he's the guy you're going to need, and he's the guy you got to save. So Barner really, really took advantage of his extra chances today, and he played pretty well.
Yeah, John, Barner's a guy who I think is the guy the fans like, right? He's kind of the guy that everybody always – he's like the pseudo Darren Sproles. Everybody loves Sproles, but he gets some time. Everybody would like to see Barner get more time.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of those things. You love the guy sitting on the bench that you don't see, and maybe in small doses, they can look really, really good. But the more they play, the more they get exposed. And generally, there's a reason the depth chart is set up the way it is. And generally, the starters are better than the guys behind them. And that's the case. Not that Kenyon isn't an NFL player, because I think he is. But if people want him to carry the ball 25 times a game, I think they're going to be disappointed with that.
Hey, give us your evaluation a week in of the quarterbacks. I'm not saying that Wentz has moved up the depth chart or anything, but just kind of, they're where they're slotted, 1, 2, and 3. Give us your overview of how these quarterbacks have looked.
Yeah, it's been a big and nothing great from anybody. Every once in a while, you see it about once or twice in every practice where you can see the Carson Wentz skill sets that shine through. Today, it was an out pattern late in practice to David Watford, who's a rookie receiver. It's just unbelievable. Frozen rope all the way out to the sidelines. You just don't see that kind of arm strength every day. But the consistency hasn't been there. Forget about practice to practice. It's play to play with Carson Wentz at this point. And the other two guys have been as advertised. Sometimes Sam looks really good, and other times you wonder what the heck is going on. And as for Chase Daniel, he's got physical limitations. There's no question about it. He's tremendously undersized for the position. It's almost, when you see the second team of the Eagles come on the field, you see Chase Daniel, quarterback, and Dennis Kelly is the right tackle, who's 6'7", 6'8". You wonder how the heck Chase Daniel can see anything above the guys in front of him. But the one thing you can say about Chase is he understands the offense, and it's pretty clear that he's the one, because he's been in it before. He's been in it for years. He's the one who really, really comprehends it and understands where the football's supposed to go and understands the progressions. But the physical skill set just isn't there with Chase Daniel.
And then, of course, Carson Wentz, who, obviously a lot of people just like to hear how the first-round pick is doing. If there was a legitimate competition here, where would you rank him?
Third, right where he is. And a lot of that is, understand he's playing on the third team. So there's a number of things with that. But you're also playing with third-team guys. So he doesn't get, for the most part, he's not out there with Jordan Matthews or Zach Ertz or Darren Sproles or even the Jason Peters, Lane Johnson, those guys up front. He hasn't been playing with those guys. And that's part of my problem with this plan as a whole, because at some point we know what the future is, and we know who that is. And I would at least like to see a few reps here and there with the top-tier talent to see what you have on hand. But the Eagles haven't worked that way yet. We'll see as things progress. But it's been clearly defined as what Doug said it was going to be. Sam's the starter, Chase is the backup, and Carson's just feeling his way on the third team. And they've been true to that plan, certainly through the first week and now one day.
Hey, John, give us your take on, there was a lot of questions asked about going live today. You wrote about it as well. He was asked about it at the start of his press conference, in the middle of his press conference, and at the end of the press conference. That seems to be a pretty big theme, and I know a lot of it is because this team has not gone live, but why is that significant to you?
Well, because of the change. Obviously, this is the first time in 4 years the Eagles have tackled to the ground in practice, and I think everybody was excited about it. Talked to a number of the defensive players after practice. They were all giddy. Lane Johnson was happy that he was able to hit somebody for the first time since college in practice. And a lot of guys felt that way. And so the natural progression of that is to ask what's better, the way Chip did it or the way Doug is doing it. And for the most part, the players seem happier with this setup, but as you mentioned yesterday, Mike, it's easy to criticize somebody when he's not here. Nobody was really criticizing Chip when he was here, so some of that is just the natural affinity you're going for your current head coach. But from a personal standpoint, I believe in the fact that you need to hit in NFL practices to be ready for the regular season. And, yeah, there's a possibility that there's going to be more injuries. And Doug addressed that today and kind of said you can't legislate it, you can't worry about it. But this is the way you have to go about things to get ready for an NFL season.
Hey, John, no one criticized Chip Kelly because they would find themselves out the door.
No, you can criticize Chip, but you would just get a well-timed quip back at you. So I think, and that's one of my main criticisms of Chip Kelly. I think he was too concerned about winning press conferences. And by the way, he won most of them because he's a very witty guy. He thinks on his feet. He's very quick with a barb, and he won them. And whereas Doug is just, more of a typical football coach, he doesn't care. He's just going to tell you what's on his mind. And I prefer that simply because I don't want my head coach worrying about sort of upstage in the media. It should be above him. He shouldn't be worried about that.
Yeah, and I think there's a different atmosphere, communication. There's a different style of communication. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, I mean the level of communication. I joke. To give you an example, and I think I told you the story before. I was walking in the hallways of the NovaCare complex in the off season with another reporter, and Doug happened to be walking by, and he said hello to us, and we both joked, "Hey, we got a hello from the head coach." Well, Chip's players couldn't get a hello from him in the hallway, which was one of Brandon Boykin's issues. So as far as emotional intelligence, the term that Jeffrey Lurie coined when he got rid of Chip and brought in Doug, I think it's, in a lot of ways, I kind of snicker at that, Jeffrey Lurie making up that term, but you can see what he means, just the fact that they're communicating, and Doug does it better in everyday situations than Chip did.
John, I want to get your take on something that he was asked about today regarding the running back situation and how he handled things, or the Chiefs handled things. And did he kind of equate how they might do things to what the Chiefs did with Jamal Charles?
Well, he kind of equated it to what they did once Jamal Charles went down, because when Jamal was there, he was obviously a superstar running back, or arguably one of the top 2 or 3 in all of football. So you didn't have to worry about a committee. The Eagles don't have that situation, but they do have the situation that Kansas City had last season once Charles got injured. And that's what he sort of compared it to. And what they're going to go for is the fact that you're going to have different guys contributing at different times. And hopefully leading that committee will be Ryan Matthews if he can get back on the field. Obviously, Darren Sproles has a role on this team, and then you want Wendell Smallwood to be a part of it. So those are the 3 guys that they want to be the committee here. Unfortunately, 2 of them are injured. The good news to that, it's early August, so it's not that troublesome right now, except the one caveat I put on that is you don't want a 33-year-old Darren Sproles getting too many reps during preseason games or practices.
Hey, John, how does Trey Burton figure into this equation?
Well, I'll tell you, he was the star of the show today. He was tremendous. Just a versatility. He lined up in the backfield, lined up in the slot, even outside the numbers. He beat Denzel Rice down the field on a stop-and-go route that was pretty impressive as far as showing off his athleticism for a tight end. Unfortunately for Trey, that's the Eagles' deepest position on offense. It's going to be tough for him. There's only one football. There's only a limited amount of playing time for tight ends, even if you use two. And obviously you already have Zach Ertz and Brent Selleck. Those two guys are going nowhere. So he's improved. He's a very good football player, but I'm just not sure how much he's going to play because the guys in front of him are so good.
On the depth charts, I'm looking at the depth chart. They got him listed as a fullback.
Yeah, I mean, he plays occasional fullback. That's what he said. Occasionally he'll line up in the backfield. His versatility. They don't have a traditional fullback, so they're going to use Chris Pantale there and Trey Burton, who are both tight ends. It's actually Pantale's got more reps as a fullback than Burton has, and I think he's a little undersized to be a true fullback, and I don't think that's the strength. I think more his strength is sort of going down the field and catching the football. But he'll get some reps at fullback, and so will Pantale, as I said. But remember, this team's going to be an 11 and 12 personnel more than using a fullback. So a fullback is not going to play that much to where he's going to be on the field a ton.
So does it make sense to keep 4 tight ends / fullbacks?
Well, you're keeping the 3 tight ends, and then sort of Pantale is making the team because he can play fullback. So it's 2 positions. So when you look at it that way, it's probably a good decision to keep 4 guys because they do want a fullback in the mix. He's just not going to play a ton. And the second part of that from a roster decision standpoint is you don't have enough receivers to say, hey, we're going to keep an extra guy there to cut the 4th guy, which would be Pantale. He's very important to what this team wants to do offensively.
John has a full report on Eagles training camp as the Eagles go live at training camp today, and that's significant because they haven't done it in the entire Chip Kelly era. They never hit at practice. You can read that full report at 97.3ESPN.com.
Hey, John, these guys that are going full speed, they're hitting a little bit. You see any fights? You see any guys getting heated with one another?
No, not yet. Believe it or not, we saw that more in off season where Alan Barber had a stretch there. We were starting to fight every day, but we haven't seen it in camp. The closest was when they were at the link. Chris Givens and Jalen Mills, the rookie corner, they kind of got into it and threw the football at each other and nearly came to blows. But we haven't had the first really official fight, even though they were hitting pretty good. So far it's been usually as you get later in the camp and guys are sick of seeing each other, you'll start to see more scraps. And I imagine we'll see them at some point. And don't be surprised if you hear the name Alan Barber starting one of them.
And now Barber, obviously the left guard there. I see that you wrote in your notes that a 6'4", 320-pound guard, Dillon Gordon, playing a little tight end. That would be 5 tight ends there. Now, I know he's a backup guard, but just putting him in as a lead blocker. So a little red zone work, I guess. Yeah,
they put him down for short yardage as a blocker, and it was just one of those interesting tweaks they tried out.
Yeah.
Because he's obviously got some athleticism playing at tight end at LSU, and now they've moved him to guard. It's a long shot for him, obviously, to make the football team, but it was interesting they put him back there.
Big guard. I mean, that's a big tight end.
Yeah, big tight end, big fullback, and as a lead blocker, and that's what he was doing. But it just shows you the inventiveness of a more traditional coaching staff, because they'll tweak formations and they'll come up with something like that, whereas obviously the prior coaching staff, you were going to run the same stuff over and over again.
John has more on Eagles practice today over at 97.3ESPN.com, and John also covers the league nationally for today's pigskin.com. And, John, I want to get a quick thought on Nick Foles and whether or not you think he'll find a home, because teams need quarterbacks, specifically one in the NFC East. So can we see Foles back in the division?
Yeah, you could. The Cowboys are desperate now because Kellen Moore goes down with an injury. They should have been desperate before. But if you talk to Jerry Jones, Kellen Moore was the best backup in football, and all of a sudden he gets injured. So when Nick got cut in L.A., Jerry said he wasn't interested. Now he's very interested. So Nick's going to be able to pick where he wants to go because there's a number of teams that need a decent backup. Dallas certainly one of them. Minnesota is thinking about signing him. Buffalo, which is kind of fed up with E.J. Manuel as their backup, is in the market. So at one point there were 10 different teams that contacted Nick. So he's going to have an opportunity to try to sit back and pick what he thinks is the best spot for him. And who knows, if he gets another chance to play at some point, he might be a starter again at somewhere down the line, somewhere in this league. Because everybody, and I know you're chuckling, but everybody is desperate for quarterbacks.
Oh, no, I agree. It's just funny because didn't Jerry Jones a week ago basically denounce Foles as an option for them?
Yes, he did.
So it's funny how...
And he speak highly of him, that's for sure.
Yeah, and then one injury changes your whole thought process. And already we've seen it in more, and that's the reason the Vikings, because their backup quarterback got injured. So every year in the NFL, you have injuries, and all of a sudden teams become more and more desperate, and that's where people who sort of wait and see how the landscape develops can take advantage of it. And that's one of the main reasons the Ryan Fitzpatrick signing came down right at the end. As soon as Nick Foles got on the street, the Jets had to end it and say, okay, because at that point, both sides could look at it and say, hey, if you're Ryan Fitzpatrick, you could say the Jets might want Nick Foles, and vice versa. It puts in the Jets' mind, as soon as somebody gets injured, as has happened, all of a sudden Ryan Fitzpatrick would become much more exciting to other teams around the league, and it forced both sides to finally get to the bargaining table.
And bad news for the Cowboys. Ezekiel Elliott will miss some time with a right hamstring injury, and you might think, it's just a little bit. Those hamstrings, man, they linger, don't they, John? They linger.
They linger, especially for skill position people, because that's the guys who got to run. They're the thoroughbreds, and it can be an injury that can affect you for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. And the minute you think you're fine and you go all out and you feel that twinge again, it's very, very concerning for any skill position player.
Yeah, so the news continues to be bad in Dallas, although the one good thing is Tony Romo healthy, and that's really the story of their season. With him out, they got no shot. With him back, they're probably the best team in the division, even with all of these ancillary problems that they have. So, of course, we'll dive into it more. John, of course, every day at 4:05, and we'll have John in for a full show this football season every Tuesday on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. We're looking forward to that again, John.
Very excited for it. Can't wait for actual Week 1 football.
All right, pal. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks, guys.